entitled Gaming for Healthy Emotion Regulation. Adam.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Adam Lobel, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Starcraft University in Nijmegen, where I study.
Sorry, you don't have a microphone?
Is it hard to hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You don't microphone.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a PhD candidate at the Starcraft University in Nijmegen, here in the Netherlands, and I study the positive effects of video games for our social and emotional development. And as soon as my slides are up, I'll get started on my talk. You know, I'll do it.
Stress you up.
My talk is actually about stress, so thank you. Is it loud? Well, okay. Today I'm going to be talking about regulating our emotions in the face of stress, something I'm doing at this moment, and why I believe that more serious game designers need to implement stress among their design principles. And I'm going to do this in 3 parts. I'm first going to call on the psychological literature in order to explain to you what I mean by emotion regulation. What does it mean to regulate your emotions, as I just said? And then in the body of my talk, I'm going to explain the connection between video games and stress by drawing on preliminary findings from a study that I recently did at my university. And I'm back on track. Here I am. Excellent. This is what I mean by regulating our emotions in the face of stress. We'll be calling on the psychological literature. Then I discuss the preliminary findings to connect stress and gaming. And finally, I'll be able to give you all some examples of games that are already doing this, so you can actually see this is already happening in practice. So let's get down to it. What is emotion regulation? Emotion regulation refers to the automatic and controlled processes that monitor and influence emotion experiences. Very simply, anytime that we throw a temper tantrum, we choose to play our favorite song, or we just want to spend the night in with a pint of Haagen-Dazs, that's us regulating our emotions. Now, when we talk about healthy regulation, we're talking about at least 2 things. We're talking about flexibility and awareness. Flexibility refers to the influence aspect of emotion regulation. This means that you're able to change your emotions in different situations. This is, of course, very important, and particularly so for the social interactions we have. How we get along with our friends and peers, our parents and partners, because we need to adapt our emotions in relation to theirs, to counterbalance theirs, or to meet them. Now, awareness refers to the monitoring aspect of emotion regulation. This means that we're actually aware of where our emotions are at any given moment. This is extremely important because, I'll back up a moment, actually. At the heart of the experience of our emotions is our physiology, what our body is actually telling us. And this is an idea that's been discussed since the dawn of psychology with William James, and remains studied until today. The idea here is that if we understand where our physiology is, then we have an insight into what emotions we're feeling. And the only way that we can actually promote and become more aware of our emotions is by experiencing stress. Only by experiencing these physiological changes can we improve our awareness. That's where our research comes in. What we want to look at is whether video games can be used as an ideal platform for people to experience stress and overcome it. And by doing so, learning what it's like for their body to experience stress so that when they're in everyday contexts where they need to regulate their emotions, they're more able to do so. So we designed a study that has 2 primary questions. The first question is, how do the emotion regulation strategies in my everyday contexts, how do they translate into the game? Is there a relationship between how I regulate my emotions every day and my behavior in the game? And second, if I'm more physiologically aware of what's happening to my body during the game, does that indicate that I'm better able to regulate my emotions in everyday contexts? Enter Starcraft II, the game famously called chess on steroids. And Starcraft II is a perfect game for this type of study. It's immensely popular, but it also has at least 3 major elements that contribute to stress in the game. The first is, unlike chess, which is turn-based, in StarCraft everything is occurring in real time. You're making all your decisions. And this leads to the stress of, am I performing fast enough, or is my opponent moving faster than I am? The second aspect of StarCraft that also leads to stress is the fact that your visibility is limited based on the pieces that you have. So in chess, you have a view of the entire board. In StarCraft, you're playing against an opponent where you're only able to see what your pieces or your units are able to see. This leads to the stress of the unknown, what's out there, which is extremely stressful. And Finally, there's the aspect of the fact that during StarCraft, you're making important cost-benefit choices at every step of the game. I'll soon show a video where you'll be able to get a clearer idea of this. So I'll break down the study. The study involved 26 StarCraft players who were competing in a tournament in our university, again, the Rabat University. And the study had two parts. In the first part, we assessed how do they regulate their emotions every day. And in the second part, we had a game session where we saw their physiological awareness and their in-game behavior for our two research questions. I'll break these down now. So for emotion regulation, we measured a number of things. You see them here. The first is suppression. Suppression refers to pushing down an emotion that you're experiencing. As it says in the sample item, I control my emotions by not expressing them. Another thing that we measured was rumination. Rumination refers to the tendency to repeatedly think over negative events over and over and over again. This is not good. The third thing that we measured was reappraisals. Reappraisals refer to the ability to look at a situation from a different angle. And by observing it from a different perspective and changing the way we think about it, we can change the way we feel. Finally, we looked at support seeking, which is essentially the frequency with which people turn to others for help when they need it, when they need the advice. When do they actually do this? So that's the emotion regulation side. Now I'm going to talk about the game session side. What did we measure there? So the first is we wanted to see, again, how their behaviors are in the game. And for that, we looked at their stressful engagement. When you're playing StarCraft, you're commanding the computer to do multiple things. And when you issue a computer to a command, just like when you do with your computer, it's working, it does it just if you tell it to do it the first time. But in StarCraft, because of how fast-paced the game is and the nature of having to make decisions on a fast basis, people often tend to tell their units to do something many times. They're issuing the same command, which is ineffective. And it's an illustration of being very stressed for the time. If you just told it to do it once and you moved on, everything would be okay. So we're able to measure this in terms of their in-game commands. Then we looked at their physiological stress during the game. We did this by measuring their heart rate. And then, based on the heart rate, we're able to look at how physiologically aware they were. The way that we did this, and this is a unique thing for StarCraft, is that right after they finished playing their game, the stressful experience that we've measured all their heart rate for, they watched a replay of the entire game while rating with a dial how much stress do you think you felt at every single moment of the game. The result is that we get a two-time series of pieces of information from one game. We get one that shows their heart rate from the beginning to end of the game, or I should say their change in their heart rate from beginning to end, and their perceived change in heart rate based on the dial. I'll show a quick video so that the procedure is perfectly clear for everybody. We'll start in just a second. Look out for those repeated behaviors, that stressful engagement. There you go. So that's what a typical session is. Is it clear for everybody? Excellent. Much of you, yes? Okay. So let's take a look at some of the data. What you're looking at is one participant from one game. The x-axis represents time. The blue represents the percent change in heart rate throughout the entire game. I think we would all agree that this person is not particularly good at detecting changes in their physiological arousal. As we see at the beginning of the game, their heart rate spikes up, so something really happened, but doesn't report much of a change. And in fact, if we look towards the end of the game, whereas arousal is actually coming down, that's when he thinks he's peaking. This person is very out of touch with what is the signal his body is sending. We have a second participant who's doing slightly better, but I think you'll also see that there's a bit of a lag in terms of his report. So when his heart rate's going up, he's bringing the dial up, but he's kind of missing the peaks over here. And over here, we see another mistake there. The third participant is a bit more of an ideal participant that I'm going to show you here. Almost every one of the major peaks in his heart rate, and the major valleys as well, is also being represented with the dial ratings that we're seeing. To give you a really clear idea of what is actually happening in these sessions now, I'm going to zoom into a 50-second snippet from this exact participant, and actually, it's this part in time. So let's zoom in. So what you're about to see now is at the top of the screen, this player is about to advance on the enemy. He's going to do so using 3 units. The first is tanks, which you can see. Then is foot soldiers, you see them as well. And soon coming will be these air units, which are able to replenish the health of the soldiers. You can see the player's face on the bottom right, so that will be animated, and you can see how stressed out he is. And there is the dial and his perceived heart rate.
Mineral field depleted.
So he advances with this tank, he gets into position. There come the foot soldiers. Okay, they're approaching the hill. Okay, he sees the enemy forces. He's already taking fire from the tank. He puts himself in position. He takes out the tank. Is he going to take it out? Yeah, he takes it out. He retreats back into position. Meanwhile, his enemy is coming in, but his tank is going to attack him. Is he going to attack? Is he going to wait? Is he going to attack? Is he going to wait? Okay, he decides to advance with the tank, bring the tank closer for supporting fire. He gets into position. He moves his foot soldiers up. Okay, here's going to be the big engagement. He's coming up. His enemy forces are firing on him. He's trying to replenish the health of his units. And it's really unclear what's going to happen. They're fighting each other. He decides to retreat. The foot soldiers advance. And what essentially happens is it's been a total stalemate. Both forces have pretty much been wiped out, and he's left with his tanks, and there he is. So that's an idea. That's 50 seconds of a game that can take anywhere between 6 minutes and a half an hour. Stressful.